Eliot, lovely to finally meet you. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I've loved your music for so long. But what I'm intrigued to know now is you've become an artist yourself, or you've returned to being an artist. Tell me about that.
Well, it actually started totally serendipitously. I had a big birthday last year, and invited a load of artists from my career. So Take That turned up, and S Club, and various Alfie Bow, various others. And we raised $100 for a charity. I tend to do these things once a year and use it as an opportunity to raise some cash. And I went on to start the show, and Alfie and Gary and a few others were in my dressing room listening on the speaker. And apparently Alfie turned to Gary and said, "Who's this singing?" And Gary said, "It's El, what do you think we're doing here?" You know. And afterwards, Gary called me and went, "El, something occurred to me when talking to Alfie." He says, you've got to make an album, mate." I just thought he was an idiot. I said, "Gaz, come on, lad, give me a break." A couple of weeks later, I went to see the boys on tour, and he'd arranged for me to meet an agent, an old friend of ours, and he came in. I said, "What is wrong with you?" And he went, "El, I'm not letting this go, mate." He says, "People need to hear your voice." He says, "It occurred to me at your gig." He says, "You've got an audience. People come to see you when you perform." And I do tend to do a few of these an audience with kind of shows, and sit with a guitar or a piano and tell stories about the songs. You know, there's always an anecdote. But he said, "You've got to make a record." So I thought, you know what, I'll think about it. But then, of course, this year we've been through this ever such a strange time of self-reflection and, you know, sort of thinking about the past a little bit more because you've got the time to do this. And it just occurred to me, do you know what, if I was ever going to do it, it would be now. Yeah. And if I was going to make an album, and like I've known forever, artists make albums for themselves first and foremost. The kind of music they want to listen to. And so I thought, well, that period for me was that late 70s, early 80s, yacht rock, pop sort of area, Hall & Oates and Steely Dan and Doobie Brothers. And so I thought, I'm just going to make an album of songs. I'll write an album of songs like that. And I've done a couple of covers. And do you know what? I'm just so proud of it. And the single seems to be going down well. People seem to like it. So, do you know what? We're living in an era where there doesn't seem to be any rules anymore musically.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree with you there, Eliot. It's true. But I tell you what, there's good and bad sides to anything in the music industry, isn't there? I mean, I miss the old way of going to Woolworths and actually buying your product, you know what I mean?
Yeah, me too.
There's that sort of thing. You get a bag of pick and mix and then you buy your single, you know? But the thing is, it also now it means that if somebody sings a song on a show, and it can be, say, something you've written that's been put in a film or a show, that can go straight up the charts instantly because people are buying it as they're watching the film almost, you know? It's a bit confusing, I think, in many respects, but on the other side of the coin, I think it does open the fact that the charts, to me now, are as radical as they were, say, in the 50s, where you might have Elvis and Dickie Valentine in the same top 10, you know?
Do you know something? I've actually done a cover on the album of a Human League song, Human. And Phil Oakey sent me a lovely email the other day because I sent it to his manager. Now, the Human League, I've always been a lifelong fan of the Human League. They're my next door neighbours at my studio in Sheffield. And we've become friends over the years. Quite often, Phil and I tend to bump into each other in Sainsbury's and spend an hour chatting about music. It's always great. But he sent me a lovely message saying, "You know what, Eliot, the truth is, nowadays, it like you just said, it seems to have gone back to a time when a good song's a good song, and it kind of doesn't matter what it is if people like it. The audience are different. For me, like you just said, that era of going and buying a record was an emotional decision, not a financial one. You'd save your money up. You only had one chance. You know what's it going to be? What I'm going to have. So it was an emotional decision, and you then go back and you put that record on. You read the sleeve notes. We were much more emotionally attached to music back then. Yes. Which is why I've sort of gone back to that part of my life and that music that I grew up with, in the vain hope that people can relate to that somehow and realise from my performances that there's a lot of emotion, a lot of honesty in it.
But can I just check now, was your first success one of my all-time favourite tracks, Independence by Lulu? Was that your...
Oh my goodness, you know, I can't believe you remember that. Yes, it was. I was hired as a producer for that. I didn't write that song. It was written by Leon Ware.
Yeah.
And I was asked to produce it and got on so brilliantly with Lou. She was so much fun to work with. And we sang together, and she said, Elliot, come and sing with me, sing some ad libs. You sound like Michael McDonald, which of course is a huge compliment to me. Yeah. And we got on brilliantly as just singing ideas to each other. That ironically led on to working with Take That. And that led to my first #1. So it really was a major part of my sort of the beginning of my career.
Could you, because I always think this is the lovely part of the music business. When you first got that success and you've produced the record and then you hear it on the radio, it must be like a stopping moment in your life where you go, because it's sort of created there in your studio, but then to hear it coming out of a radio somewhere else is really surreal.
I never get over it. Just yesterday I had this experience again with my new song that Shirley Bassey has recorded. And it got its first play on Radio 2 yesterday. Wow. It was just like the first time I ever heard one of my songs. It never gets old, that feeling of it's like, it's hard to explain, it's hard to quantify the energy, you just think, isn't it? It's out in the world. And the funny thing is, it very quickly then ceases to be mine anymore and starts becoming the soundtrack of everyone else's life, and you sort of get detached from it and start listening as a normal music lover.
Yes.
So it doesn't last very long, that feeling. And then nowadays, if I'm going through a shopping mall or something, you happen to hear one of these songs, there's something cool about that. Or in the back of a cab in London, it comes on the radio. Yeah. You sort of have this moment where you kind of go, this is pretty cool.
But your dad was a singer, and you basically, you're saying, because were you born in Australia? Am I correct in that?
No, I was born in Sheffield. And we were one of those 15 quid families, that emigrated to Australia in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And my dad was a singer. So I think it's funny actually. Gary Barlow and I share this, that my dad, when we came back to England, especially, did the working men's clubs in the north, just like we all did. And this is where you learn your chops as a musician up here. Yeah. And Gary was the same. And what you learn the craft of songs and the structure of why, because you're only ever playing hits, and you get to know the structure of the relationship between bass and chord and melody. And it was like it's a real education for a musician doing that circuit, because it's hard. You have to be good,
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I do have an affiliation with that world myself. And what's interesting is you have to, as you say, you can't think, I'm going to play one of my own, because they're there on a Saturday night. They've got a pork pie on the boil, bingo.
That's right.
And they want to hear things like what are in the charts, whether it's Boney M at that time or whatever, and the band, which could sometimes consist of an organist and somebody on drums, if you were lucky. And then you had to try and put your best over. And I sort of think that they, as everybody says, Elliot, they are the toughest audiences, because they just talk if they don't like you.
I remember doing one. This sums it up for you. I remember doing one gig where we were the band, and we did the first set, and not one single person clapped after any song, not one. And it was a full club, a big full club. Anyway, come to after the first spot, and I said to the other guys, we're going to get paid off here, so obviously it's not going down well. And waited in the dressing room for the committee man to come and give us half of the money, Yeah, lads, thanks a lot. He didn't turn up, so we had to go and do a second spot. Anyway, we got to the end of the thing, and we were all stood at the bar, and the band leader guy went off to get the money. And a bloke come out of the crowd up for his last drink, and he said, hey, you were good, you lot, we'll have you back. And I looked at him and I went, what? Nobody claps? And he went, nah then, kid. Nobody claps me when I come out at pit either.
It's just so true, isn't it?
But at that point you go, oh, he says, it's your job, kid. And I was like, wow, okay.
No, but it's true.
That's the reality.
I was going to say, and that really is good grounding, because I think, it's very easy to mock all these talent shows and everything like that. But I always think, Elliot, that they literally start with the best show reel you could possibly put round someone. Beautiful lighting, the best camera angles, their dress, their styles, whatever. And I do think a lot of them struggle when they have to go back into the reality of maybe you're singing in a shopping mall at Christmas and the PA is not that great, you know what I mean?
That's right, that's right.
People are thinking, who are you?
Well, do you know what about, you know, say what you want about that world, but if you look back at television, the classic television, classic entertainment, whether it be the variety, you know, the Royal Variety or whatever, all of those incredible acts were all cabaret acts.
Yes.
They'd done their craft, they'd learned their craft, and they had their chops down for playing in front of audiences like that.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, a lot of these TV-born artists, they don't have that opportunity. They just don't. So, like you say, first time they've actually got to go out and sing, you know, without the glitz and the effects and stuff, it doesn't half show them up for what they are.
So, from your point of view, you know, you've written so many wonderful songs, and I'm not just saying that, you really have written soundtracks to people's lives. What was the first time that you'd written one and you thought, oh, you know, I really like this one, and you want somebody to record it? How did that, you know, because obviously you're working as a singer yourself now, but were you always making music yourself behind the scenes as well?
No, I've never ever considered doing music for myself, and throughout the 90s it was such a blur because I was being hired by labels to write the single for that artist's album, so I was like the hired gun, if you like, and it's a great position to be in because you get the lead single and all that kind of thing. So it was always very focused on whoever the artist was, and trying to get in their head and make it sound like it was their vocabulary, which is the one thing I think I'm proudest most of, is that if you look at my track history, I was able to go from Spice Girls to Celine Dion to Bryan Adams in one quick period because it was never about me. It was always about the artist and making the song sound like it belonged to them. So when it comes around to actually thinking about what I would want to do, you have to go back to, you know, things that you've learned and heard. I watched a brilliant program. I think it was Elvis Costello was talking about the Beatles, and this was really brilliant. It was a real eye opener for me. He was talking about when Rubber Soul was released.
Oh yes.
And he says he just couldn't wait, so he queued up for the album. He said, I got it home and I put the album on. He says, and I just started crying. So I just thought, what have they done? Where's Please Please Me? Where's Help? Where's all those incredible songs gone? He says, within 2 weeks, I couldn't imagine being in the planet Earth without Rubber Soul. He says, and what you learned as a result, and what I always remember, he says, you've got to trust artists to take you on their journey with them. Yeah. But they're not going to stand still. They're not going to do what you expect them to do, because that in their nature is that's where they're going to go. They're going to take you somewhere. You just have to trust. If you believe in that artist, you've got to go with them. I find
it interesting. Let me take you back to being 25, and you've got a lot of success now, Elliot, and you're 25. And what I love about this is Sony, you suggested to Sony that they buy your mum and dad's house so you can effectively live in it and be creative. Why did you want that house? Is it where you felt there was a creative buzz in that building? Because there can be, can't they? I believe that.
So my dad had put a little extension on the back of the house, and this idea of having my own studio in the house was just so amazing to me. And my mum and dad, getting older, they wanted to buy a bungalow. So I just said to them, well, what if I bought this house off you, put the studio in the little extension? There's a little room, you know. Yeah. I said I could have artists come and stay with me here, and then that, you know. Yeah. So that was the original. Them going back to Sony after just starting to have hits, and saying to them, "Look, I know this is a gamble." And actually, Sony and my manager, God bless him, he was risking the fact that there's probably going to be no commission. Because what I was saying to him was, "Look, I feel like a bit of a phony. I feel like I haven't learned my craft yet. What I want to do is shut the door and just be a songwriter for a year." New artists, not a start, no pressure, just new projects. Of course, 2 of those new projects were 911, and we had 9 consecutive hit singles with them. And the second one was the Spice Girls. so much for shutting the door and you know, making it easy on myself. So it started as an idea of being able to give myself a bit more time, and all it ended up doing was fast forwarding the clock and thrown me right into the fire, which is, you know, hilarious.
But you love being in. Is Sheffield your comfort zone to, you know, to work in? Because I think it's interesting, isn't it? I always think this about when you look at old comedians, you know, that didn't travel, like Max Miller didn't go north much because, you know, he knew where his audience was. Or if you look at Peter Kay, he bases himself in the Northwest because that's where the material is as he goes around, like you say, Sainsbury's or something, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh yeah, this is funny to me. And when we get to the big city and we, you know, we make it or whatever, you do lose the thread a little bit because you think, should I be doing this? Should I be seen at this place? And, you know, all that sort of stuff. Is that where you're most creative, do you feel?
It's a good question, this. I think, and I know Gary feels this way, and Peter is a good friend of mine, funnily you mentioned Peter. I think it just keeps you real when you're from up here. Because people tend to treat you as you treat them, and it doesn't matter who you are or how famous you think you are. It just doesn't matter. If you're a good guy, they'll treat you like a good guy. And I think that's a good thing for people in industries like ours, because, you know, let's face it, the industry is based on fluff and, you know, making you feel more special than you probably are. And I've just never subscribed to it because I've always maintained this, you know, very strong work ethic. And Gary Barlow is exactly the same. Neither of us feel like we deserve anything unless we put in a good day's work, and we work hard as a result, and that just means that you get a lot more done, and you end up being more prolific because you just have, you know, that attitude towards achieving stuff. And I think being up here allows you to breathe a bit easier, to concentrate on it. I love it when artists come up, we get more done. There's not as many people popping in, and, you know, the managers in London, the record company in London. So we get like 3 days work done in a day in that instance. And I've tried to live in London for a bit. It just didn't rub with me. I found it difficult to concentrate, and it's just so cold. You know, there's just so many people that I love speaking to strangers. It's one of the best things about being a northerner. Whereas, of course, I nearly get arrested for it.
I know what you mean, you know, it's because it's when you go back home and they say to me things like, oh, you look tired. And you think, all right. You know, I've just flown in, so yes. And but what I want to know is, you know, your process, because as I say, you've had so many hits and stuff. When you, what I think must be easier for you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that you can sing the song to the artist, you know? We've worked with people, and I'm sure you know, there's a lot of these composers. They are brilliant on the keyboard, but they cannot transmit the song, you know? So you're sitting there thinking, I think I know where you're going, but I'm not sure. For you, it must be like, have a listen to this, goes like this,
you know what?
Put your own inflections on it.
Another great question. I've always wondered how other producers do it. You know, when you get an artist in, you can't, what I'm after is a certain thing. I know they're capable of it, or I think that they could push themselves to do it. To be able to sing something to them and have them then, you know, almost compete with you, it pushes them. That's what happened with Lulu. It happened with Gary Barlow. It happened with Kenny Thomas. It's one of those things where you're able to sort of present something and they go, all right, okay, let me have a go at this. And then all of a sudden you start getting what you're after. I don't know how people, it must be pot luck that they get it. Because I don't know how people do it without being able to convey it that way. I've been very lucky in that instance.
I was going to say, it must just help you, because I always look back to the Lionel Bart method, you know, where he sang out of tune into a recorder. Then you're like, just gave it to somebody. And you think, what does this mean, you know? But of course, he was incredibly successful, so it obviously worked for him. Let me tell you as well, or let me ask you, should I say, you got into movies and were successful in those as well. How did that come around? Because, of course, something like, I know Mr. Bean, Picture of You with Boyzone, I love that song. It's just a cheery song, isn't it? It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to come from anywhere. It's just a nice song. Where did that idea come from for that song for you?
That particular film, that particular song was probably one of the most difficult film songs I've written. And the reason being, because the film company was so specific that they wanted a song that really did work with the film and the script. However, the record company, being because it was Boyzone, wanted a love song. And in the film, there's no love interest. There's no real sort of gender opportunity to, you know what I mean?
Well, he's Mr. Bean.
There's no way of. I worked through it and watched the movie, and but whether it's a film with a love interest or not, we're human beings, and all things are about our relationship to each other, and whatever it is. That's what the content of the film was. It was a relationship between Mr. Bean and the curator of the if you've seen the film, the curator of the art gallery, and they send Mr. Bean over as meant to be a scholar, and of course he's a nightmare and he ruins it all. But the key relationship in the film was between the curator and him. I just thought it doesn't have to be a love song. It's just a dynamic between these two characters. So eventually we settled on, after probably wrote the lyric 3 times. You'd write it, it works for Boyzone, doesn't work for the film. And then suddenly realised, actually, this is just a relationship and it should be taken that way. And let people interpret it the way they want. That's the good beauty of songs, And that's how it ended up being a picture of you, because it was a throwback into the movie. It was about a painting. And then it was about the expectations we put on other people. And the disappointment when it doesn't work.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And when people say, look, people will say to you, don't work with that guy, he's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And you go, no, I'm going to give him a chance. And then he lets you down. Do you know what? I should have listened to all my friends.
Elliot, do you go into the studio and only think of ideas then? Or are you, as you say, tootling around Sainsbury's and you think, I've got a melody floating around in my head, or you know what I mean? Because people, I'm always intrigued by songwriters. I mean, Andrew Lloyd Webber said to me, he does get ideas, but he tends to just focus when he's in, at the piano. And I thought, well, what happens if nothing comes at that point?
Yeah.
Because it's very much like, there you go, I'm going to do it now. You can't always.
Yeah, that's a very real thing. I actually quite like the pressure of putting myself in I give myself hours per day to write and sit down and come up with something. However, that being said, thankfully I've got my phone on me all the time, and I have what I refer to as starts, and they're just a whiff of an idea, a little bit of a melody or a title, and I just speak them or sing them into the phone, and then every now and again when I have that writing time, I just play them all back and go, oh, that's quite nice, and it sparks you off in a direction,
Yeah. I was going to say
that tends to be the thing. But funnily enough, you've just reminded me of something. I used to go to the supermarket to write lyrics, because it gets me out of the studio, so you're not just looking at a bunch of equipment. And I would go around the supermarket with my dictaphone, and people look at me like I'm a crackpot. And on one of these occasions, I was doing this, and my phone went, and it was Bryan Adams. And I'd only just been to see him the night before on tour in Sheffield. I'm a Bryan Adams fan. So he called me and he said, hi, this is Bryan Adams. And I swore at him because, of course, I thought it was someone taking a mick.
Especially in Sainsbury's, Elliot, like you think,
exactly. So he laughed and he went, no, man, this is Bryan Adams. He said, I love your Spice Girls record and I want to work. And I was like, right, I know you're taking him, and swore at him again. And he laughed and he said, no, look, I'm in Manchester. I said, I know. I saw you in Sheffield last night. He says, well, do you want to come over? Do you want to come over for a cup of tea? I literally got my trolley and pushed it and left it in the middle of the aisle and got in my car and drove to Manchester. And sure enough, he made me a cup of tea, and 25 years later, we're still best mates writing songs together. So it is remarkable where those ideas come.
Yeah, and also songwriting has changed in many respects, hasn't it? Because people can reach out to you now. In the old days, producers and songwriters, unless you were mega famous, like say Sir George Martin or something, or Norrie Paramore or somebody like that, you didn't really know them because they weren't famous. It was somebody that another person did. What I like about today's digital age is that you can compliment that composer. You can connect with them if you're an artist and say, I'd like to work with you. I like what you did with X and stuff like that. I mean, are there anybody that you've ever worked with, Elliot, that you've been totally daunted by, to the point where you think, I don't know what, I've got no ideas, they're coming in on Tuesday or whatever. What do you do at that point when you think, I could bluff it and say this? You know, how'd you get out of it?
I remember. It's funny that I remember. I tend to be quite prepared when I'm going into. Not. You know, I'll have a couple of starts.
Yeah.
Is what I'm talking about. Something I can just pick up a guitar and go, what about this? I remember being in LA at one time, and I got a phone call from a publishing company. Mr. Kennedy, would you like to work with Burt Bacharach? And I stopped and I went, is this a joke? And he went, no, Burt Bacharach would really like to work with you. And I was like, absolutely. He said, could you do tomorrow? I said, definitely. So the next morning, I'm driving down the Pacific Coast Highway on my way to Burt Bacharach's place in Santa Monica. And I thought, I'm going to tell Gaz. So I rang Gary Barlow. I said, Gaz, I'm on my way to work with Burt Bacharach. And he went, unbelievable. He says, have you got home? I said, what do you mean? He went, any ideas? Have you got any ideas? I thought, no. And he went, El, pull over and get some. Don't go in cold. Anyone else would just think, surely that's not how it works. But sure enough, it does. You know, you have to sort of. I always say to people, you have to put yourself in a position ready to receive. You know, yes. You want to put your aerial up. If you want to receive an idea, you've got to get into a zone where you kind of go, okay, I'm ready. And that I've always said to people that I'm lucky enough to hold a pencil the day the universe wants to write a song. You know, because you feel like you're a bit of a channel. You know, for this energy. And so, sure enough, I pulled over the car, sat there looking at the ocean for a bit, thinking, what could possibly be good enough to play to Burt Bacharach? Anyway, sure enough, 10 minutes in, I get a little inkling of an idea, start singing it into my phone. Get to Burt's house, he's such a gentleman, such a sweet guy. And he says, Eliot, come on in and come on, sit at the piano, sing me something. I says, well, it's funny, Bert, I've just had this little idea, and I sang it to him, and he went, Eliot, you sound like Luther Vandross. Like, oh my God, this is going well. So we end up having this brilliant day. We write 2 songs, and one of them ends up getting sung by Luther Vandross, believe it or not, who recorded it, but died before it came out. So that's terrible.
But lovely. But you mentioned Broadway and musicals. Again, the younger you could never have imagined, or maybe you did, you know, but that you were going to be, you know, a theatrical writer, as it were. Is it different, you know, Eliot, to do that type of, because you're really doing a story, aren't you? You know, you're pushing the story on each song as it is.
Yeah.
How was your first attempt at that, and did you enjoy the whole process?
It was the most challenging thing I've ever done as a writer, the most, by far, creatively enjoyable experience. And that's because you have to sort of forget everything you thought you know, really. And what I learned very quickly is that songs in plays, essentially in musical theatre, exist because their song is the thoughts and emotions the actor can't say.
Yes.
So you can have 2 people on stage, a man and a woman, or 2 characters, and what he's trying to say to her, he can't say, so he sings it. Now, we as the audience have the privilege of hearing his thoughts. She can't hear them.
Yeah.
She's just waiting for him to say the right things. So when she starts singing her thoughts, he can't hear her. That's the beauty of theatre, is that, and then they turn to each other for that final moment, which was what was building up to. But we've had the privilege of learning their turmoil, their emotional state. That's the beauty of songwriting in theatre. It's active. Yeah. And it took a while to get that you can't just take 3 minutes out for a song. We've got to either relate to the character, it's got to move the story on somewhat. So all of those tools that I didn't have, I had to learn and craft as we were going. So it was such a learning. I mean, talk about being at the coalface and learning a new craft. I've never had that kind of steep learning curve as I did musical theatre, and it was just so enjoyable. I got the bug. So I'm halfway through writing a new musical at the moment.
What's that about? Can we ask? I was going to say, is that
so I can tell you exactly what it is. Do you remember that iconic photograph of the men eating lunch on a girder high above New York?
Oh, yeah, brilliant, yeah.
It's called Lunch Atop a Skyscraper. I'm writing a musical. I'm actually looking at it. I'm writing a musical about those people. It's about the immigrants that built New York.
Yeah.
And it's called Empire State Dream. And my two main characters are two Irish brothers that go over looking for a new life. And all of the other immigrants on there that have left their home to come to New York to follow their dreams. And it's much harder than anyone expected. And it's basically the story of 1930s New York after the stock market crash, after Prohibition. It's an unbelievably exciting time musically. It's big band and swing. It's, Babe Ruth is the baseball player. It's Tommy Dorsey. It's Duke Ellington. So the music has got a very swing big band feel about it, which is what I want the orchestra to be, actually, a big band. So it's a period thing, but of course contemporary songwriting, but with that flavour. So it's a challenge, but oh my God, I'm loving it. It's coming together really well.
Can I ask you, was that your sole idea? You just saw that picture and thought, this is my story?
Yeah.
Wow.
Actually, I wrote a song called Boyhood Dreams of New York, and so to me, this whole musical is a bit of a love letter to New York from me, because I have this sort of romantic sort of view of it, going there as a songwriter, and when I was younger, and just oh my God, I'm on Fifth Avenue where Sinatra walked, where you think about the history of that city, and I've as a result of Neverland, I've become friends with the guy that owns Radio City Music Hall. I actually wrote a musical there for the Spring Spectacular, for the the dancing Rockettes,
Love that.
And got to be in there and work in that environment, and a show on Broadway, and you walk down Broadway and you're like, I can't believe I'm a part of this. You see your billboards on Times Square, and it's like a weird dream, So I have this love affair with New York, and this is my love letter to New York. So it was one of those things where I wrote this song, Boyhood Dreams of New York, and I wrote the song and thought, what on earth is this? It was almost like a purging of something.
Yeah.
And I got to the end of it and thought, well, I may as well put that on the shelf. No one's ever going to cut a song like that. And then one morning I woke up with that photograph in mind, and suddenly thought, oh my God, that's what that song is.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of a story about those guys and it literally just went from there. And now I'm sort of 7 or 8 songs in. I'm really, really happy with it. And I'm hoping to make a presentation to producers early next year.
Oh, look, I hope it goes really well for you. I love things like that, I like the fact that, I just love it, the fact that somebody can be inspired, just by looking at something. You talk about Radio City, and it's so true. When you go in that building, we've been lucky enough to film all around it and inside and everything. And you're kind of thinking, wow, what's gone on in here is incredible. And just the fact that the Rockefellers had all that money, and you look at these private suites thinking, all right, people lived in here, did they? It's,
no, unbelievable.
And then because Northerners, we sort of come outside and think, what? It's such a big, it's true though, isn't it? You can't believe it when you're over these places, Is there anything, Eliot, that, other than doing musicals, is there an artist right now, as we're talking live, as it were, that you'd like to work with that you haven't, and what's the reason that you'd like to work with them? Is what's the hope for you?
I've been incredibly fortunate that I've worked with some of my all-time icon artists, and but there's one that's probably been the biggest influence on me. I would dare say probably saved my life on a couple of occasions when I was younger, and that would be Kate Bush.
Oh, love her. Yeah.
As a creative influence, there is no one single person that's had more of an effect on me over music.
Oh.
And I don't know if I'd be able to do it, in honesty. I think I'd be a mess, because I went to see her when she did that run of gigs in London.
Yeah.
Lucky enough to get some tickets. And you know what? I was in tears most of the show. It was just so emotional for me.
Yeah.
Being able to actually see it was like an out of body experience. And the idea of sitting with her and trying to contribute to someone who, as far as I'm concerned, is an absolute genius, would be an unbelievable opportunity, but an unbelievable challenge at the same time. So that would probably be the one artist alive that I would dearly love to work with, and one that sadly we lost not that long ago would be Tom Petty.
Yes, another great,
So again,
both brilliant
just
artists.
massive influence on me. Amazing catalogue of songs. True songwriter, true artist. I was heartbroken when we lost Tom Petty. It was terribly sad.
It's interesting, you know, Elliot, because we were talking earlier on about Top of the Pops and the power of music. Kate Bush, I bought everything, got everything, you know, love her.
Yeah.
And one of the memories I have as a kid growing up, and it's hard to believe this now, but she popped up on a Saturday morning's kids show singing Hammer Horror with all the hair hanging out and everything, you know. And that propelled me to buy that from Timothy White's when they used to sell singles that afternoon, because the performance and the whole wackiness of it, you know, I thought
theatre of it,
brilliant, you know. I knew what Hammer Horror was, I'd heard of these films, but I was thinking, when you think about it now, this will be a Saturday morning's kids show, and they've got this woman whirling around, you know? Madness, really, you know, when you think now. But she was and
incredible.
Remains powerful, a very powerful person. I did meet her very briefly in EMI once, and I didn't want to talk much because, like you, I thought, I don't want you to be ordinary, you know, be mad. Elliot, before we wrap up, I have to say, you've got to give us a plug for your latest music. Where can we find it? How can we buy it? And where should we go and get it from?
So the single is My Destiny, is out currently. It's on Spotify and all the download sites. It's on the radio, thankfully, and we're going to be on Radio 2 next week, which I'm so excited about. So that's the forerunner, and then the album is called A Yacht Named Sue. The title being a bit of a nod towards the direction of music, being yacht rock, if you like. Yeah. So it's called A Yacht Named Sue. It's going to be out in January, but I'm also going to release another single probably in the next 3 weeks, depending on how radio goes with Destiny. But that's the plan, is to drop another single before Christmas, which will be off the album. I
was going to say, will you do some dates hopefully next year? Will you end up then becoming an artist?
I can't wait to do it. Yeah, the idea is to hopefully do. I love those little stage theatres, those 600-700 seats.
Yes.
You know, really intimate. So I'd love to do like a bunch of those audience with nights where we get to tell stories and you get to spend a bit of personal time with the audience. You know, so that the plan is to do a bunch of those dates and take the album out there on the road. I can't wait for that.
You know, we should team up. I'll come and interview you on the stage. We'd never stop gossiping.
That'd be lovely. This has been so enjoyable. Your questions have been fantastic. I'm going to hold you to that one.
Really, I love it, honestly, because when I was reading about you, I did a theatre years ago in Dinnington, but I can't remember what it was called.
Oh, it would have been called the Lyric.
That's right. Yeah, the Lyric at Dinnington. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was touring in a variety show at the time, and my mum and dad produced it and everything like that. And I remember a man there. You talk about people, you know, he didn't want to pay for the coach for all the artists home, even though we'd filled the theatre. You know what it's like. He said, I'm not paying for coach, you know, and we had to go to the box office, you know, get the money and everything. And you're thinking, Dinnington, that's a memory. And then after that,
that's where I went to school.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is that after that, you know what it's like, Elliot? He rings up about 6 months later and says, you went right well, we'll have you back. And you think, you won't. Well, Eliot Kennedy, it's been an absolute thrill. We're going to do this again because I've got so much more I want to ask you.
What a joy. Anytime you want. It's a privilege.
For now, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you indeed.